Eliza Hart had traveled many long miles across the open land. But nothing had prepared her for the sudden winter storm that rolled over the Wyoming plains that afternoon. The sky had been clear in the morning, a wide blue stretch with only a few thin clouds drifting lazily across it. She had even smiled at the warmth of the sun on her face, thinking the day might pass quietly and gently. She had hoped to reach the next small town before nightfall. But nature had other plans. As the hours passed, the wind began to change. It whispered at first, then grew stronger, brushing her cheeks with a cold touch. Eliza tightened her shawl around her shoulders and kept riding, trying not to think about the strange heaviness in the air. Her horse, Hazel, snorted and tossed her head, sensing the shift as well. Even animals knew when the world was about to change. By early afternoon, the wind turned sharp and unfriendly. Snowflakes appeared out of nowhere, small at first, then thicker and faster. Eliza looked up at the sky and watched it darken as if someone had pulled a gray curtain across the sun. Her heart sank. A storm on the open range was no small matter, especially for a woman traveling alone. She urged Hazel forward gently. "Just a little farther, girl," she whispered. "We can find shelter. We always do." But deep down, she wasn't sure. The wind grew louder, pushing against her, making each breath cold and heavy. Snow gathered on her coat, her hat, her eyelashes. Within minutes, it became harder to see the path she followed only moments before. The world around her blurred into white shapes and spinning flakes. She tried to remember the map in her bag. The next ranch or settlement should have been a few miles to the west if she had calculated correctly. If she had stayed on the right trail. If the storm hadn't confused her sense of direction. But now the land looked the same in every direction. Endless snow and sky. Hazel took slow, careful steps, the snow crunching softly beneath her hooves. Eliza could feel the horse trembling with cold. She reached down and stroked Hazel's neck, her fingers numb through her gloves. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't see this coming." The storm only grew stronger. The wind howled now, a long, lonely sound that made Eliza feel small in the enormous world. Snow swirled around her like 1,000 tiny white stars, dancing without rest. Her coat was no longer enough. She pressed her arms close to her chest, trying to protect her body from the cold. Minutes passed, maybe hours, she couldn't tell anymore, and Eliza's strength began to fade. Her fingers stiffened, and her legs felt heavy. The cold crept into her bones, slow at first but steady. The way water fills a cup, drop by drop. She tried to stay alert, to keep her mind awake, but the storm made everything slow and heavy. Then Hazel stumbled. Eliza gasped and grabbed the saddle horn. Hazel tried to stand tall again, but the snow was deep and uneven. With another tired step, the horse slipped and sank to her knees. Eliza quickly dismounted, her boots sinking into the snow. Hazel looked up at her with large, soft eyes. The horse wasn't hurt, only exhausted. Eliza could tell by the way Hazel's sides rose and fell quickly, her breath forming small white clouds in the freezing air. Eliza pressed her forehead against the horse's warm neck, grateful for the little comfort Hazel could still offer. "It's okay," Eliza whispered. "We'll rest for a moment. You did so well." But deep inside, she knew they couldn't stay there long. The storm was too strong. The cold was too sharp. If they lingered, it would only get worse. She looked around, squinting through the white blur. She turned in a slow circle, her boots sliding slightly as she tried to spot anything. A fence line, a tree, a barn, a distant hill, a road. But nothing looked familiar. Nothing looked safe. Then, through the swirling snow, a faint glow appeared far in the distance. It was small, like the light of a lantern, soft and flickering. At first, she wondered if it was just her imagination. The storm had worn her down. Maybe she was seeing things that were not really there. But when she blinked and shielded her eyes, she saw the light again. A warm, golden dot in a world of cold white. Her heart leaped with a fragile hope. Hazel! Hazel! Look! She pointed toward the glow. Though she wasn't sure the horse could see it through the storm, Hazel lifted her head tiredly, and Eliza felt a rush of determination. They had to get there. They had no other choice. She tugged gently on Hazel's reins. Come on, girl. I know you're tired. I'm tired too. But we can make it. We just need to reach that light. Hazel pushed herself up with effort. Eliza walked beside her, guiding her slowly across the snowy ground. The wind continued to push at them, as if trying to stop them. But the small glow ahead stayed steady. Eliza fixed her eyes on it, refusing to look away. She had learned long ago that hope, even the smallest kind, could keep a person moving when everything else failed. Step by step, they made progress. Eliza stumbled at times, her legs shaking. But she kept getting up. Hazel pressed on as well, her breath heavy but determined. Together, they moved like two shadows in a world of white. As they drew closer, the faint glow became brighter. Eliza began to see shapes around it, a fence line, maybe, then the outline of a building. Her heart beat faster. A ranch house. Someone's home. Someone with a fire, with shelter, with warmth. She could almost feel the heat of the fire even though she was still far away. But her body was reaching its limit. Her steps slowed. Her breath grew shallow, and her vision blurred at the edges. The cold had wrapped itself around her like a heavy blanket, pulling her toward sleep. She shook her head quickly, forcing herself to stay awake. She had to. Just a little farther. Hazel gave a soft, tired sound, as if encouraging her to keep going. The light grew larger. She could see the window now, glowing warmly from inside the house. She could make out the shape of a barn near it, and a corral fence, and a small path leading to the front door. Relief washed over her like warm water, but the last few yards felt like the longest of her life. Her feet dragged. Her arms felt too heavy to lift. She leaned against Hazel, using the horse's strength to stay upright. I see it, she whispered. We're almost there. Finally, they reached the edge of the corral. Eliza touched the wooden fence, using it to steady herself. Hazel stopped beside her, breathing hard but calm now that shelter was near. Eliza looked toward the house. She wanted to call out, but her voice wouldn't come. She tried again, but only a soft breath left her lips. The warm glow in the window was the last thing she saw before her legs gave way. The cold ground rose up to meet her, and she felt her eyes closing despite her efforts to stay awake. She had fought so hard, but her strength had finally run out. Yet even as she collapsed in the snow, her heart held on to that tiny spark of hope, the hope that someone inside that warm house would see her. Someone would come, someone would help. And that hope carried her into the darkness like a gentle hand. Jonas Mercer had lived alone on his small ranch for many peaceful years. He was used to quiet mornings, slow evenings, and long days, where the only sounds were the wind moving across the grass and the soft steps of his cattle. Solitude did not bother him anymore. It had become his friend. The way some people grow close to a loyal dog or a dependable horse. He knew the land, and the land knew him. On the evening the storm arrived. Jonas had finished feeding his animals earlier than usual. The sky had grown dark faster than he expected, and the cold had settled over the ranch like a thick blanket. He checked the barn doors, tightened the latch on the chicken coop, and made sure everything that could blow away in the wind was safely tied down. Winter storms did not scare him, but he respected them. Out here, a man had to. Inside the house, he started a fire in the stone fireplace. The room glowed with soft orange light as the flames rose, crackling gently. Jonas removed his gloves, rubbed his hands together to warm them, and then set a kettle of water on the stove. It would be a long, quiet night, but he didn't mind. He planned to read a little, maybe play a tune on his old guitar, and go to sleep early. But as the kettle warmed and the fire settled into a steady burn, Jonas heard something unusual outside. A soft sound. A thud. Then, nothing. He paused, listening closely. The storm's wind pushed against the walls, and snow tapped at the window like tiny fingers. For a moment, he wondered if he imagined it, but a few seconds later, he heard it again. Jonas grabbed his coat and opened the front door. A wave of cold air hit him instantly, sharp and biting. Snowflakes rushed inside, like tiny travelers seeking shelter. He stepped out onto the porch and narrowed his eyes against the swirling white. The world was a blur, but his rancher's instincts told him something wasn't right. He scanned the corral, the yard, the barn. Then he saw it. Near the fence, half buried in snow, was a figure, a person lying still beside a tired-looking horse. Jonas felt a jolt of concern. No traveler should be out in weather like this, and definitely not lying on the ground. He hurried across the yard, his boots sinking deep into the fresh snow. As he approached, he saw that the figure was a young woman. Her clothes were covered in frost, her hair stuck to her face, and her hands were curled tightly as if she had been fighting the cold for far too long. Her eyes were closed, and she didn't react when he knelt beside her. Jonas lifted his lantern and checked her breathing. Relief washed over him when he felt the faint, slow rise of her chest. She was alive, but barely. The horse beside her, a gentle-looking mare, gave a soft, tired sound, as if asking for help too. Jonas placed a calm hand on the horse's neck. "Easy there, girl," he said softly. "You did well bringing her this far." He knew he had to act quickly. The storm was still growing stronger, and the cold could steal away a person's strength in minutes. Jonas slid his arms under the young woman's shoulders and carefully lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, her body weakened by hours of fighting the storm. He carried her toward the house, moving with steady steps to keep her close to his chest. The warmth of his coat protected her a little, but she was still freezing, her skin cold against his arms. Inside the house, the fire glowed warmly, welcoming them both. Jonas laid her gently on the bed near the corner. It was the warmest place in the house, closest to the fireplace. He pulled several blankets over her, tucking them around her shoulders and feet. She did not wake, but she gave a tiny whisper of breath, as if the warmth reached her just in time. Jonas then hurried back outside for the horse. He guided the mare into the barn, brushing the snow from her coat and giving her a small bucket of warm water. The horse drank, slowly, gratefully. He gave her fresh blankets too, patting her neck before returning to the house. Inside, he took a moment to catch his breath. The young woman still lay motionless in his bed, her cheeks pale except for a soft pink where the cold had touched her too strongly. Jonas felt a wave of worry, but also a strong sense of responsibility. She was now in his care, and he wouldn't let anything happen to her. He walked to the table and lit another small lamp. The gentle glow filled the room. Then he pulled up a chair beside the bed. He didn't want to disturb her, but he needed to make sure she woke safely. After a few minutes, he dipped a cloth in warm water and carefully placed it on her forehead. Her skin was icy, but slowly, very slowly, began to warm beneath his touch. He checked her hands next, rubbing them gently until a bit of color returned. At last, the young woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. Her fingers twitched under the blankets. She gave a soft, confused sound. Jonas leaned forward slightly, making sure his voice was calm and gentle. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "You're out of the storm." Her eyes opened, slow and heavy, as if waking from a long sleep. She looked around the room, then at him. She blinked several times, trying to understand where she was and how she got there. For a moment, she seemed frightened. But Jonas raised his hands a little to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly. "You collapsed outside. I brought you in." She swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "The storm. I couldn't. I thought." "You're okay now," Jonas assured her. "You're warm, and you can rest as long as you need." He handed her a cup of warm water. She held it with shaking hands, sipping slowly. The warmth traveled through her body, bringing a bit of strength back to her eyes. After a few quiet moments, she gave a weak but grateful smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't think anyone would be out here." Jonas nodded. "Most folks aren't, but I try to keep my lantern on when the weather's bad. Never know who might be passing through." "Number money." She looked at him with tired curiosity, studying his calm face, his weathered coat, the gentle patience in his eyes. He was clearly a man used to taking care of others, even if he lived alone. "What's your name?" she asked, when her voice grew a little stronger. "Jonas Mercer," he replied. "This is my ranch. And you?" "Eliza," she whispered. "Eliza Hart." He smiled gently. "Well, Miss Hart, you're welcome to stay here until you're well enough to travel again." She looked surprised by his kindness. In her recent travels, she had met many unfriendly people and closed doors. Being rescued by a stranger felt almost unreal. "But I don't want to trouble you," she said quietly. "It's no trouble at all," Jonas replied. "You needed help. Anyone would have done the same." Eliza lowered her eyes slightly, as if she wasn't sure she believed that. But she did believe Jonas. There was something steady and honest about him. Something that made her feel safe, even though she had only just met him. The warmth of the room began to make her eyelids heavy again. Jonas noticed and spoke softly. "You're tired. Rest for now. We can talk more when you're feeling better." Eliza nodded slowly and settled deeper into the blankets. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with a peaceful glow. Jonas pulled the chair back to give her space but stayed nearby in case she needed anything. As she drifted into sleep, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: comfort. The storm no longer roared in her ears. The cold no longer stole her breath, and the fear she carried deep inside began to loosen its grip. She was safe, warm, and not alone. Jonas sat by the fire, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. He wondered what she had gone through to end up on his doorstep in the middle of a winter storm. But he didn't ask. Not yet. There would be time for that later. For now, all that mattered was that she had survived, and that his home, usually so quiet and still, now held the presence of someone who needed it. And perhaps, he realized, someone he didn't mind having there. Eliza woke the next morning to the soft sound of crackling wood and the warm glow of sunlight slipping through the small window. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Her mind felt thick with sleep, and her body felt heavy but warm, far warmer than it had been the day before. As she blinked and looked around the quiet room, she slowly remembered the storm, the snow, and the moment she had collapsed near the ranch. Then she remembered the man who had carried her inside. Jonas. His name drifted back to her gently, and she felt a small sense of calm settle in her chest. She turned her head and saw him near the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. He moved with steady, quiet motions, as if he didn't want to disturb the peace of the morning. He noticed her waking and offered her a small smile. "Good morning, Miss Hart," he said softly. "You got some rest, I hope." Eliza nodded, though her voice didn't come right away. Her throat felt dry, and her thoughts were still slow. Jonas poured a cup of warm tea and brought it to her, keeping his steps quiet and his expression gentle. She took the cup with both hands, letting the heat seep into her fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," he replied. "You slept through the night." "That's a good sign." She sipped the tea slowly, letting the warmth spread through her. Her body still felt a little sore, and her head felt light, but she could tell she was much better than before. The blankets were soft and smelled faintly of pine, and the room around her felt safe in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. Jonas returned to his chair but kept his eyes on her, making sure she wasn't uncomfortable. He didn't press her with questions or hurry her in any way. He simply wanted to make sure she was all right. For a few minutes, they sat in comfortable silence. The fire warmed the air, and sunlight brightened the edges of the wooden walls. Eliza let her eyes wander around the room. There was a shelf filled with books, a small table near the window, and an old guitar leaning against the wall. Everything in the room looked simple but cared for, the way someone lives when they take pride in quiet things. Finally, when she felt ready, she looked at Jonas. "I caused you a lot of trouble yesterday," she said softly. Jonas shook his head. "You caused no trouble at all. Anyone out in that storm would have needed help. I'm just glad you found your way here." Eliza hesitated. She wanted to believe him, but part of her felt uneasy. Not because of Jonas. She trusted him more than she expected to trust a stranger, but because she knew her journey wasn't simple. She wasn't just another traveler caught in bad weather. She was someone trying to run from a past filled with worry and pressure. Jonas saw the uncertainty in her eyes but didn't force her to speak. He simply waited. He could tell she had something on her mind, and he wanted her to share it when she felt comfortable. After a long moment, Eliza set the cup down on her lap. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold this time, but from the weight of her story. I wasn't just traveling," she began quietly. "I was trying to get away from something." Jonas nodded slowly, not surprised but patient. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready." Eliza took a breath. "I think I need to tell someone," she admitted. "I've been keeping it inside for too long." He stayed silent, giving her space. Eliza stared into the fire as she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "My father had a small business. It wasn't big, but it was all we had. For years, he tried to keep it going. He worked every day, morning until night, hoping it would get better." She paused, her eyes clouding with memories. "But then, everything went wrong. We lost money, then more money. He borrowed some to keep things running, thinking he could repay it soon. But nothing improved." Jonas listened attentively, his hands folded calmly in his lap. "When my father passed away," she continued, swallowing the lump in her throat, "I tried to settle things myself. But I didn't know much about business. I tried my best, but I couldn't make the payments he left behind." Jonas nodded slightly, understanding more than she knew. Many families had faced hard times like that, times where life pushed them harder than they could push back. "One of the people my father owed money to." She paused, carefully choosing her words to keep the story gentle. "He was very strict, very persistent. He said I had to repay everything quickly. I told him I needed more time. But he wouldn't listen." Jonas's brows lowered a little, but he kept his expression calm for her sake. "He started showing up everywhere," Eliza whispered, "asking for things I couldn't give, pressuring me, reminding me over and over that the debt wasn't going away." She shook her head slowly. "And the worst part was, I had no one left to help me. No family. No friends who could step in." Her eyes grew distant with the memory of days filled with worry and nights filled with the fear of uncertainty. "So I left," she said finally. "I left town. Then the next town. Then the next. I kept traveling, thinking maybe if I went far enough, he would stop following me. I've been moving for months." She folded her hands tightly. "But I think he's still looking for me." Jonas let out a slow, thoughtful breath. He simply considered her story with the quiet understanding of someone who had seen how life could press down on people in ways that left them tired and uncertain. "That explains why you were traveling alone in the middle of winter," he said gently. Eliza nodded. "I thought I could reach another town before the storm hit. Once you leave one place, You always feel like you have to keep moving. She gave a small, tired laugh. I guess the storm stopped me instead. Jonas leaned a little closer, his voice still calm. You're safe here, Eliza. No one is going to trouble you in this house. Her eyes softened, touched by the sincerity in his voice. She didn't want to bring her troubles to someone else, but she couldn't deny the comfort his words gave her. But I don't want to cause problems for you, she said quietly. Jonas shook his head. Helping someone isn't a problem. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what I'm going to do next. We'll figure that out when you're stronger, he replied. There's no need to decide anything today. Eliza felt her chest loosen slightly, as if a long, tight knot had finally begun to unwind. For the first time in months, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't alone with her fear. She was simply resting, in a safe place, with someone who didn't judge her. Jonas stood and lifted a pot from the stove. He handed her a warm bowl of stew, simple, hearty, and comforting. She took the first bite carefully, and the taste filled her with warmth that spread through her chest. Thank you, she said again, her voice steadier now. Jonas smiled. You've said that enough, he replied gently. Just focus on getting better. Eliza ate quietly, her mind calmer than it had been in a long while. The fire crackled softly. The room felt peaceful. And Jonas's presence, steady, quiet, kind, made her feel grounded. For the first time since she started running, she felt like she could breathe. But neither of them noticed the thin trail of footprints in the snow far beyond the ranch footprints left behind by someone who had been searching. Someone getting closer. The storm finally slowed by the next morning, leaving the land covered with a thick blanket of snow that sparkled under the soft winter sun. Everything looked peaceful and untouched, as if the world had been washed clean overnight. Jonas stepped outside early to check on the animals, and Eliza watched him from the window, wrapped in one of his warm blankets. She felt stronger than the day before. Her body no longer ached, and her thoughts were clearer, though still tender from everything she had carried inside herself. Her horse, Hazel, was safe and warm in the barn, well fed and comforted. For the first time in a long while, Eliza felt a sense of calm settling gently around her. After a few minutes, Jonas returned inside, brushing snow from his coat. Everything looks fine, he said cheerfully. Your horse is doing well. She's eating like she's making up for lost time. Eliza smiled at the thought. Hazel deserved all the food she wanted after their long and difficult journey. Would you like to go out and see her later? Jonas asked. Eliza nodded eagerly. I would love to. She had barely finished speaking before she spotted something outside the window, something small but important enough to catch her eye. Footprints. Not Jonas's. Not hers. A second trail, fresh enough to still look clear in the snow. Her breath caught in her chest, and she pressed a hand against the window frame. At first, she thought maybe they were old tracks, maybe from an animal or a traveler who had passed earlier. But the shape was wrong for an animal. Too defined, too human, and too close to the house. Jonas noticed her staring and walked to the window. When he saw the tracks, his expression became thoughtful. Not angry, not alarmed, just quietly serious. Those weren't there last night, Eliza whispered, her voice unsteady. No, Jonas agreed softly. Someone was here early this morning. Looking for something? She asked. Jonas turned to her with a calm, steady gaze. Or someone, he said gently. Eliza felt a soft shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, the weight of her past felt close again, close enough to brush against her peace. I'm sorry, she said quietly, lowering her eyes. I didn't mean to bring trouble here. Hey, Jonas said kindly, placing a reassuring hand on the windowsill beside hers. You didn't bring trouble. You brought yourself, and that matters more. His steady voice soothed some of the worry inside her, but not all of it. Whoever had followed the tracks might still be close. Jonas seemed to understand her concern before she even spoke. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said gently. "Footprints don't always mean danger. Could be a traveler lost in the storm. Could be someone looking for help." Eliza appreciated his calmness. But she knew in her heart that the prints meant something else. She had seen too many signs like this during her months of running. Too many near encounters. Too many moments where she felt eyes on her even if she couldn't see them. Still, she said nothing. Jonas didn't push her. He simply walked away from the window and added more wood to the fire. "Come, sit," he said. Eliza followed him, but her thoughts were heavy. She sat by the fire, warming her hands, trying to steady her breath. Jonas brought her a warm cup of tea and sat across from her, giving her space but staying close enough for comfort. His calm presence made her feel grounded, even when her thoughts were stormy. "When you've been running for a long time," Jonas said quietly, "sometimes every shadow feels like something chasing you." Eliza looked up at him, surprised by how well he understood without her saying anything. "But shadows aren't always danger," he added gently. "Sometimes they're just shadows." She wanted to believe him, truly wanted to. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing outside that house, looking at the light in the window, wondering if she was inside. "Whoever left those tracks," Jonas said, "didn't try to knock. Didn't come to the door. They only passed by." Eliza nodded slowly. "Do you think they'll come back?" Jonas paused, choosing his words carefully. "If they were just someone passing through, then no. If they were looking for something specific, maybe. But we don't know enough yet to worry." He didn't want to frighten her, but he also didn't want to pretend the footprints meant nothing. He respected her intelligence too much to brush it aside. After a moment, Jonas stood and reached for his coat. "Just to see which direction they came from, I won't go far, and I'll be back before the kettle boils." Eliza watched him carefully. "Are you sure it's safe?" He smiled lightly. "I know this land better than I know the back of my own hand. I'll be fine." "Ah. Ah." Eliza didn't try to stop him. She trusted him maybe more than she should have after knowing him for such a short time. But trust settled easily around Jonas, like a soft blanket around tired shoulders. He stepped outside, and she watched him through the window as he moved along the snowy path, examining the footprints closely. He didn't rush. He walked with the steady patience of someone who had read the land his whole life. After a few minutes, he followed the prints toward the outer fence. Then he stopped and stood completely still, staring at something far off. Eliza pressed her hands against the window, her breath fogging the glass. She couldn't see what Jonas saw, but his stillness made her anxious. Finally, he turned and walked back toward the house. His steps were calm, not hurried, but his expression held a quiet seriousness when he came inside. "What did you see?" Eliza asked softly. Jonas removed his coat and shook the snow from it before answering. "The tracks came from the direction of the road," he said. "They came close to the house, circled around the corral, then continued toward the tree line." Eliza swallowed. So they were watching. Jonas didn't deny it. Instead, he sat beside her and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "They might have been. Or they might have been trying to figure out if the ranch was safe to approach. People passing through often look for shelter, especially after a storm." Eliza looked uncertain. So Jonas added gently, "They didn't get close to the windows. They didn't try to come inside. They didn't do anything but walk." He placed the kettle on the stove and turned to her again. "But I want you to feel safe," he said softly. "That matters to me." His words warmed her in a way the fire alone couldn't. She took a slow breath, feeling her nerves soften just a little. "What should I do?" she whispered. "For now," Jonas said kindly, "stay here. Rest. Think. And know that you're not alone." Eliza felt a knot inside her slowly loosen. Just a little. Jonas continued. If someone is looking for you, we'll face that together. Not with fear, not with anger, just with calm understanding. The kettle began to whistle softly, filling the room with warmth. Eliza looked at Jonas, her eyes softening with gratitude. Thank you, she said. This time, not for shelter or food, but for something deeper. For safety. For patience. For not letting her face her past alone. Jonas nodded gently. You're welcome. But outside, near the edge of the trees, a quiet figure stood watching the ranch through the thin branches, unmoving, patient, waiting for the right moment to step forward. Not to cause harm, but to find answers. And perhaps, unknowingly, to change everything. The next morning arrived quietly, as if the world itself wished not to disturb the peace that had settled inside Jonas's small ranch house. Soft sunlight slipped through the frosted window and painted warm lines across the wooden floor. The storm from earlier days had finally passed, leaving the land bright and calm, covered with untouched snow that glittered like powdered silver. Eliza stood near the window, wrapped in one of Jonas's thick blankets, looking outside at the endless white fields. She felt rested, stronger, and safer than she had in a very long time. The warmth of the fire behind her filled the room with a gentle glow, and the smell of breakfast drifted through the air. Jonas was at the stove, preparing something simple and warm. He moved around the kitchen in a steady way, humming softly under his breath. The sight of him made Eliza smile. Just a soft, quiet smile she didn't even realize was there. Jonas noticed her watching and lifted his eyebrows slightly. You're up early, he said, handing her a warm cup of tea. Eliza accepted it gratefully. I slept well, she said. Better than I have in months. I'm glad to hear that, Jonas replied. You look stronger today. She nodded. Stronger and steadier. She took a sip of tea before adding softly, because of you. Jonas didn't answer right away. He simply smiled and went back to stirring the pot on the stove. But his quiet smile said more than words could. After breakfast, Jonas asked, Would you like to check on Hazel? Eliza's face brightened instantly. Yes, please. Together they walked outside into the crisp morning air. The snow crunched gently beneath their boots, and the sun reflected brightly off the white ground. The air was cold but peaceful, the kind that felt clean and fresh rather than threatening. Hazel neighed softly when Eliza entered the barn, lifting her head with recognition. Eliza's heart warmed as she stroked the horse's neck, whispering gentle thanks for carrying her through the storm. Hazel seemed content, her eyes soft and calm. She's recovering well, Jonas said. Give her another day or two, and she'll be ready to travel. Eliza paused, her hand resting on Hazel's warm coat. Travel, she repeated softly. The word felt heavy, like something she wasn't sure she wanted to touch. Jonas leaned against the barn door, watching her thoughtfully. You don't have to go anywhere if you're not ready. Eliza turned to him slowly. I know, but I can't hide forever. You're not hiding, Jonas said gently. You're healing. Those words settled deep inside her. For months, she had thought of herself as someone running from her past, from responsibilities, from the fear of being found. But now, hearing Jonas speak, she realized she'd spent the last few days doing something very different. She had been resting, breathing, becoming herself again. Still, she knew that the footprints near the house meant her past was not as far away as she hoped. Jonas, she began quietly, if the person searching for me comes here, I don't want to cause trouble for you. Jonas pushed his hands into his coat pockets and looked at her calmly. You're not trouble, Eliza. I mean it, she insisted gently. You've given me kindness when I had nowhere else to go. I don't want someone to come here asking questions you shouldn't have to answer. Jonas looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were thoughtful, steady, and kind. Let me tell you something, he said finally. Everyone has a past. Everyone carries something heavy at some point in their life. Helping someone through a hard time isn't trouble. It's just being human. Eliza felt her eyes soften, touched once again by his simple warmth. Jonas wasn't the type to make grand speeches. He didn't pretend to know everything. But he had a way of saying a few words that reached the deepest places inside her. They left the barn and walked back toward the house. As they approached the steps, Eliza felt her heart flutter. A figure stood near the fence, tall, bundled in winter clothing, but not frightening. The person wasn't sneaking around or hiding in the shadows. He stood politely, waiting. Jonas saw him too, and stepped slightly in front of Eliza, not as a shield, but as someone who cared enough to make her feel safe. The figure lifted a hand in greeting. "Hello there," he called out, his voice gentle and friendly. As they approached, the figure's face came into view. It was a middle-aged man with kind eyes, snow-dusted hair, and a worn satchel at his side. He looked more tired than dangerous. "Morning," Jonas said calmly. "Can we help you with something?" The man nodded politely. "I hope so. My name is Thomas Hale. I've been looking for someone. A young woman who's been traveling alone." Eliza's breath caught slightly, but something about the man's gentle tone eased her worry. Thomas continued, "I'm not here to frighten anyone. I'm just trying to help. A man in town mentioned someone pressuring her to pay off her father's business debt." He shook his head with quiet disapproval. "That's no way to treat someone already going through enough." Eliza blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected understanding. She hadn't expected any kindness from someone connected to her past. Thomas gave her a warm, reassuring smile. "Miss Hart, I'm here because I found out what was really happening. The man who was bothering you wanted more than he had any right to demand." Eliza looked down, unsure what to say. "When I learned about your situation," Thomas continued gently, "I checked the records myself. Your father didn't owe nearly as much as you were told, and the person who was insisting on it had no proper claim. So I came to find you not to ask for anything, but to tell you that you don't owe him a thing." Eliza felt something inside her loosen all at once, like a string that had been pulled too tight for too long, finally snapping free. She struggled to hold back tears of relief. Thomas smiled kindly. "You're free, Miss Hart. You can stop running." Jonas looked at Eliza gently, knowing how much those words meant. Eliza took a slow, shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't expect anyone to help." "Good people help where they can," Thomas said simply. "And I'm sorry you went through so much before someone stepped in." He gave her a small envelope. "These are the papers, showing the truth of it. You can go wherever you choose now, without worry." Eliza held the envelope delicately, as if it were something precious. Thomas tipped his hat politely. "I'll head back to town now. I just needed to make sure you got the truth." When he walked away, his footsteps in the snow were soft and steady, leaving only peace behind. Eliza stood silent for a long moment, her mind swimming with relief, gratitude, and disbelief. Jonas remained beside her, giving her all the time she needed to breathe. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "It's over," she whispered. "I'm really free." Jonas nodded warmly. "Yes, you are." Eliza laughed softly, a laugh full of release, like the sound of a burden falling away. She turned toward the ranch, looking at the home that had given her warmth, rest, and hope when she had none. "I can stay a little longer?" she asked quietly. "Just until I decide what to do next?" Jonas smiled, gentle, sincere, and filled with a quiet happiness he didn't try to hide. "You can stay as long as you like." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the urge to run. She didn't feel fear pressing at her back. She didn't feel alone. She felt safe, wanted, home. And as she walked beside Jonas toward the house, the snow crunching softly beneath their feet, she knew one simple truth. Sometimes, the place you never expected to find becomes the exact place you were meant to stay.